Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the CFO's Guide for Upgrading to Costpoint 7. This is our fourth webinar on Costpoint 7. We did one way back in June of last year on just focusing on the changes between Costpoint 6 and Costpoint 7. And then we did one, a little deeper dive on just the security changes. And then a couple of weeks ago, we did one on the CIO's Guide for Upgrading to Costpoint 7. But today we're going to focus on the CFO's Guide. For our agenda today, we're going to look at some of the highlights and implications of Costpoint 7 changes. That kind of sets the table for us. And then we're going to get into the functional upgrade. In the last webinar, the CIO's Guide for Upgrading to Costpoint 7, we introduced the timeline for upgrading, and this time we're going to take a deep dive, really explore that timeline, go block by block through the functional upgrade of everything you need to do to upgrade to Costpoint 7. Then we'll spend a little time looking at some other considerations, and then we'll look at some resources that are available to you as you go to upgrade to Costpoint 7. And then we'll open it up to your questions. Speaking of questions, if you have questions during the webinar, please type them in the questions box, and then you'll have an opportunity at the end when we'll get a chance to answer them all. At Neosystems, we're proud to say, grow ahead, we've got your back office. We provide strategic back office services, including accounting, HR, and IT. Consulting forms an umbrella over these services that includes implementations, upgrades, business process reviews for Costpoint 7 and for other Deltek systems. Today, in our secure private hosting infrastructure, Neosystems' IT team is running Deltek and other applications for 400 companies and their 23,000 employees. Our clients are running Costpoint, Cognos, TM1, and other applications. Neosystems is SSAE 16 compliant, both SOC 1 and SOC 2. We're PCI DSS compliant. We're ITAR compliant. You get the idea. We take care of all these compliant issues so you don't have to. With me today, I have Randy Cole, our VP of Client Services. Prior to joining Neosystems, Randy was with Deltek for 15 years. With Deltek, he led the Costpoint 7 User Interaction Design Team. If you have any questions about the user interface, Randy's the guy to ask. During his tenure, he also led Costpoint implementation teams, as well as running quality control for Deltek. With Neosystems, Randy and his team managed the Costpoint accounting for several companies. Simply put, Randy is well steeped in many aspects of Costpoint, and in particular in Costpoint 7. As I mentioned, I'm Brian Giblin. I'm the product manager at Neosystems. I talk with clients and non-clients and develop product and service offerings that meet your most pressing business challenges. I also try to roll up my sleeves once in a while and manage some of our Costpoint 7 hosting migrations. Very quickly, I want to highlight some of our depth and breadth of experience. All total at Neosystems, I estimate that our employees have 1,000 years of experience with Deltek products. This includes installs, upgrades, implementations, integrations, hot fixes, you name it. Our consultants have completed hundreds of successful Costpoint implementations, and our experience spans to the end-user accountants through our managed accounting services. Our experience with Costpoint 7 goes back 3 years to the early days of the beta program. Since then, we've been hosting Costpoint 7 in our private secure cloud. We've completed Costpoint 7 upgrades. Randy and his team have completed 2 Costpoint system upgrades. One of his clients has been live on Costpoint 7 for over 6 months now. And he's currently in the process of upgrading yet another client to Costpoint 7. And to reiterate, we have clients live on Costpoint 7 in our infrastructure today. We install the hot fixes and keep them up to date. And we have Neosystems accountants using Costpoint 7 every day. And this gives us a unique perspective. We live with our decisions. Our accountants provide feedback. So we do it how you would do it. We just have the advantage of doing it over and over, and yes, over again. So to set the stage for our conversation today, Costpoint 7 went to general availability on April 1st of 2012. And that means that on October 1st of this year, Costpoint 6 will go into sustaining support. And what exactly is sustaining support? Sustaining support means there'll be no more hot fixes, even for those Severity 1 issues. It means no tax updates, no legal updates, and no regulatory updates. We have to keep in mind, too, though, that Costpoint 6 was released over 5 years ago. So a lot of the underlying support software, well, that's starting to reach its sunset point as well. So we've been looking and asking the question with that October 1st deadline in mind. When do people plan to upgrade? And we asked them back in June, when do you plan to upgrade? Do you plan to upgrade, 3 months, 6 months, not on your radar? Well, not surprisingly, back in June, 85% of people says 6 months or more are not on their radar. When we asked again in November, it was closer to 50-50. So we're starting to see companies make that move to upgrading to Costpoint 7. So for one last time, I'm going to ask the question, when do you plan to upgrade to Costpoint, start your upgrade to Costpoint 7? Are you getting started immediately, or have you already started? Are you going to start within the next 1 to 3 months, 3 to 6 months, more than 6 months? If you start to get out more than 6 months, we're talking you're starting in late August, early September. So you might not make that October 1st deadline, but maybe you've got good reasons to not make it. Maybe you're planning a bigger business process review. Could be lots of reasons why companies make the decisions they do. So let's take a look at our results. All right, we've got 33% in 1 to 3 months and 14 already started, so almost 50% in the next 1 to 3 months. And I think if you start in the next 1 to 3 months, you can get done before the October 1st deadline. Now I'm going to turn it over to Randy. Randy and a team here have put together this CFO's guide for upgrading to Costpoint 7, looking at those issues so that you can make an informed decision about how to go about upgrading to Costpoint 7. Randy?
Thank you, Brian. Welcome, everyone, this afternoon. I'll spend a little bit of time with you first talking about what things you can consider and be aware of as far as Costpoint 7 is concerned, and then spend some time talking through the migration process as you upgrade from Costpoint 6 to Costpoint 7, things to consider and ways to approach that. The biggest highlight from Costpoint 7 is the way that you interact with the systems, the change from client-server. Back when I was at Deltek, as Brian mentioned, I was involved with the user interface development of Costpoint 7. What we wanted to do at that time was not just take Costpoint 6 and move it to new architecture and give you the exact same thing on the web. We want to take the opportunity to make it a better product for you. So what we did is we went out and we talked to our clients, but even better yet, we went out and engaged a third-party group who specializes in user interaction in the software environment. They came in and, independent of us, went out and talked to the Deltek clients, found out what they liked about the system, what they didn't like about the system, how they intuitively thought about the system and doing their job as opposed to how the system made them work. Using that feedback, then the Deltek team sat down and redesigned a lot of the interactions that take place when you work with Costpoint. And you're going to see a lot of those as you go into, start looking at Costpoint 7. And the typical story we use is a lot like Microsoft Office. If you think back to 2003 version and then when the 2007 version came out, all the same functionality is there. It still does calculations, it does word processing, whatever the appropriate application is, but how you interact with it is drastically different. You went from a toolbar in Office 2003 to a ribbon in 2007. As a result, things that you expected to find is a little harder to find them. But once you found them and you got used to the new interface and interaction paradigm, it was a lot more efficient and actually it was better in the long run. You'll find a lot of the same type of things with Costpoint 7. As people who are used to Costpoint 6 move to Costpoint 7, there's going to be a learning curve for them to go through. They're going to have to learn where things are, how they process now versus the way they processed in the past, things like that. What we found, though, is working with many of our clients is that as new people pick up Costpoint, they're picking up Costpoint 7 a lot faster than they used to pick up Costpoint 6. So it's proved out to be more intuitive for the new user. Additional things you'll find is there's new printing and reporting capabilities. That to me is one of the big exciting things about it. It makes Costpoint available to people beyond just the back office. Likewise, the availability of bringing Costpoint to the user through the browser. If you think back to Costpoint 6, whenever you wanted to use Costpoint 6 on a new computer, you had to call IT. IT had to then come in there, touch the computer, do an install, do a configuration, and then you could use that. Well, that's great until you walk down the hall and you want to show somebody something and their computer's not set up, or you're trying to work from home or some other remote location. With Costpoint 7 being a browser-enabled product, that means anywhere you have a browser, you're able to go in and access Costpoint 7. Makes it a lot easier if you walk down the hall and show someone something. If you were out on a trip and you need to check something from your motel room, if you want to work from home in case of bad weather, or you were in D.C. and if you don't want to deal with the traffic, you want to work from home. So that's going to bring a lot of additional satisfaction to your clients, both your internal and your external clients, because it opens up to them beyond the back office. Some of the additional implications to be aware of, both some are good and some are bad. One of the very good things is there is no software cost to upgrade to Costpoint 7. If you're currently paying your Deltek maintenance, your upgrade is already paid for, is there, is ready for you to grab and go with when you're ready. The other side, however, is it does require different software and server architecture. I'm not going to get into that a lot of detail. Our CIO's guide is available out on our website if you'd like to go back and review that. I believe some of you probably attended that last week as well. Again, I won't get into that. One of the critical things, however, as you go through, and to me the biggest implication going through the upgrade is make sure that you do thorough testing. When you went from Costpoint 3 to 4, 4 to 5, 5 to 6, those were just minor upgrades relatively. Yeah, there's some new functionality brought in, but most of the system remained unchanged. What you really need to test in those situations is the new functionality that was brought in. Costpoint 7 is a totally different animal. With Costpoint 7, when they re-architected it from a client-server environment in 6 to a web-based environment in 7, they literally had to rewrite everything in the system. Your database underlying stayed the same. Your stored procedures inside the database stayed the same, but all the code beyond that changed. Therefore, you need to test everything. If this is your business critical system, you want to make sure that everything goes through. You've tested all your screens, you've tested all your processes, things along those lines. I'll touch a little bit more on that later. Other thing you want to make sure you do is make sure you're maintaining the current version via hotfixes. Costpoint's been out almost a year now. Prior to that, there were a lot of time spent in beta. But during that year, there have been a lot of defects that are found and have been fixed. The last thing you want to do is spin your wheels by wasting time finding a defect only to find out someone else has previously found it and fixed it, and you just don't have the current hotfix installed. So make sure you work with your IT team, your hotfixes stay installed, and you're all current that way. Lastly, but definitely not least, is training. Training is critical to moving to Costpoint 7. This is a report we received from Deltek a few weeks ago. If you look at it, the biggest thing that jumps out to me is that roughly 2/3 of the cases they reported on their help line or through support is really based on training and user knowledge. It's not really based on defects. As I said, the paradigm of the users is changing a lot from what was done in Client 6 to Client 7. Yes, there are still defects, and those were fixed as well, but that's only about 25%. Again, 2/3 of that really comes back to the users, their understanding of the system and the new way the system works. Some of you may have heard about Costpoint 701. Costpoint 701 is the first service pack to come out. Typically, again, we're users here. I worked at Deltek for many years and had experience working with users. Typically, when a new version of Costpoint comes out, people tend to wait and say, I'll let somebody else figure out all the problems, and I'll jump on the bandwagon later after the first service pack comes out. Typically, that's probably a good idea. The concern here is the service pack for 701 is coming out on April 1 in limited availability. What that means is Deltek is releasing it to a limited set of clients, not to everybody. It's not in general availability. That means they've moved beyond the beta testing period, but they're putting out there with a limited number of clients so that as they encounter additional issues, they have a smaller subset of clients they have to work with to manage that. The general availability is going to be available for everyone. It's probably 3 to 6 months down the road from there. So some of the things it does provide you in there, obviously, is all the patches and hotfixes rolled up into a single release. It also provides, it changes the reporting server, moves from Actuate to a product called BERT. There's some enhanced hardware options that provide greater availability, and it does become browser agnostic. But again, unless there's a pressing need for you to go to 701, we do recommend that you wait, let some other people find those defects, and let you learn from their mistakes instead of you having to learn the hard way. Another slide we got when we were meeting with Deltek a few weeks ago is some of their guidance from upgrade planning. As I mentioned before, when you going from 6 to 7, it's not like the previous versions when you upgraded from 4 to 5 or 5 to 6. This isn't a quick thing you're just going to do over the weekend, slap it in, come in on, go home Friday, upgrade on Saturday and Sunday, come in on Monday, and be going again. You really want to take some time to do this right. This means you're going to take some time up front doing the planning, making sure you've accounted for everything. You've looked at all the type of work you're going to do, the things you need to test, how you're going to test it, how you're going to provide training, and have all that planned out. Then the actual implementation, the training and cutover itself, that's going to take 3 to 6 months at a minimum. So with October 1 coming on this quickly, it's a good thing that most of you are either started or starting now. Another recommendation they had is work with a consultant. Again, I'm the type of person I like to learn from other people's mistakes so I can avoid making them myself. I'm kind of averse to pain. There are consulting groups out there like Nia Systems and others who are out there working with clients every day, converting them from Costpoint 6 to Costpoint 7. They've learned what are the best practices. They've learned where the roadblocks are, what are the pitfalls to worry about, and how can you avoid those. So you want to work with some consultants who have experience working with Costpoint 7 upgrades. They'll come in there, they'll help you set up your application servers, look at your system, work with you whether it's best to host with a third-party group or try to do that yourself, help you work through your planning and preparation, provide training, things like that, and hold your hand through the entire testing process. If you were with us on the CIO's guide a couple weeks ago, this slide will look familiar. The dark blue bar timeline at the top is basically what they reviewed as part of the CIO's guide. The lighter blue bar across the middle is where I want to talk about today. That's kind of the functional upgrade schedule and approach you need to take. The first thing you want to do is take a look at your security and doing a security and a functional review. For the most part, when Costpoint 6 goes to Costpoint 7, you've got just about everything there. A couple things that don't convert over. One of them is your security model. That Costpoint 6 security can be upgraded to 7, but you lose a lot of the control that you had before. Actually, not that you lose it, it changes. The way Costpoint 6 security was set up is you could set up a user group, but an employee could only belong to a single user group. What that meant is if you had someone who did multiple functions, you had to sign them up to set them up in one user group, and then do a bunch of one-offs to either take away an application or provide access to an application, and it became really fragmented and hard to manage, exactly who had access to what. It wasn't very easy to manage. With Costpoint 6 going to Costpoint 7, as I mentioned, the whole user interface and where things are located, all that has drastically changed. The modules are different, the navigation is different, so security will come over, but it doesn't come over the way you would expect it to. So you really want, one of the first things you want to do is make sure you sit down and do a good evaluation of what your security requirements are. Take a look at how your company uses Costpoint, what the various types of users are, what those user groups should be. One of the really cool things about Costpoint 7 is, yes, you still set up user groups like you did in Costpoint 6, but unlike Costpoint 6 where an employee could only belong to a single user group, in Costpoint 7 an employee can belong to multiple user groups. This allows persons to share work with two different groups to belong to two different groups without having to do a bunch of one-off changes. It also gives you more granular control. If you think back to one of the screens that's pretty popular in Costpoint is the statement of indirects. In Costpoint, when you go into the statement of indirect screen, there's actually a two-type application. It's a report screen, but it's also a processing screen. So if you're going through your month-end close, there's probably people that want to go in there and find out what's happening in the overhead rates, take a look at the statement of indirects, but you don't necessarily want those same people recalculating your indirects for you. Some of the granular controls that security provides in Costpoint 7 is you can go through and control what someone can do on a specific screen. So I can go through and set up a user that allows them to run the report in the statement of indirects, but I can turn off their ability to do the processing. On top of the security review, you also want to do a functional review. In the part of the functional review, you really want to take a look at how you use the system. What are you taking advantage of? What are you not taking advantage of? Quite often what happens is you get Costpoint, you get your staff in there, you get them all trained up, they're all excited, they learn how to do their job, and then they hire somebody else, and they train them what they know, well, at least most of what they know, and then that person trains the next person, and so on down the road. It becomes like a copy of a copy of a copy of a copy. And what you find is over time is your newer staff don't really know the system as well as your older staff do, or maybe the staff that's left the company. As a result, you wind up not using as much of Costpoint and getting the value out of Costpoint that it can really give you. So one of the things you want to do is do a functional review. You can do that internally, or you can bring one of the consulting firms to work with you. They can sit down and look and say, okay, well, how are you doing your business now? What works for you? What doesn't work? What kind of problems are you having? Is there another way to do it that gives you better value out of Costpoint? One of the things to consider as the functional review is your stored parameters. As I mentioned, there's a couple things that don't come over from Costpoint 6 to Costpoint 7. One is the security model, and the other one is the stored parameters. Unlike the security model, which will translate over but is not as effective, the stored parameters don't come over at all. What that means is you'll need to sit down and determine what stored parameters you used in Costpoint 6 that you also need to use in Costpoint 7. The bright side to that is it gives you an opportunity to do an inventory of what stored parameters are out there. Chances are if you've got 20 users of Costpoint that run project status reports, you've probably got 15 of those that are exact same things just saved under different people's names. So as part of your functional review, it gives you the opportunity to go through there, look at those stored parameters, determine where there's overlaps, and come up with a standard set or sets of parameters that you want. You then will turn around and reset those up in Costpoint 7. The other thing you want to do as part of your functional review is look at the interfaces and integrations you currently use with the system. The way Costpoint integrates the interfaces with systems changes in Costpoint 7. You don't have the preprocessors like you did in Costpoint 6. It's available through straight menu functionality through uploads in Costpoint 7. Similarly, Costpoint 7 provides you ability to use web services. That may be something you want to look into. Again, you can work with one of the consulting firms. They can help you configure the web services to maybe allow that interaction to happen outside of manual intervention and have the systems talk to each other electronically. Additionally, there's some new functionality. It's not a whole lot of new functionality because the biggest part of Costpoint 7 is porting over from to the new interface and new hardware architecture. But there is some new functionality out there in Costpoint 7. You want to take a look at that and see if it's something that can provide value for your company. So once you've done your functional and security reviews, you then want to start moving into your test plan. As I mentioned earlier, this must be thorough. You can't just assume that now these first two screens work, everything works right. You really want to take a look at everything that you do in the system on a monthly basis and test all those processes. This is a great opportunity if you have desktop procedures or if you don't have desktop procedures to create desktop procedures. If you have desktop procedures, this is a great opportunity to update them. You're going to need to do new screenshots. You need to document the new way you use the system. This is time to use those desktop procedures both as a tool to start building your test plan, but also as something you can update as you move forward. When you think about your normal month processing in Costpoint, it really breaks it down to two things. You need to put information in the system, then at the end of the month you process it and get it out and get your reports out. So really that's kind of how we look at the testing approach. We break it down into two phases. The difference, however, is where in a normal month you think of that as I'll do data entry, I'll enter transactions all first, and then I'll process at the end. We're going to reverse those from a testing perspective. No one has enough staff to maintain two systems 100%. So how are you going to get to a full month's worth of processing if you can't do double data entry into two systems? What we recommend is you start with the month-end processing. When you get to the end of your month, you've frozen all your ledgers, you've got everything entered, all your transactions entered, everything's ready to go, and you're ready to start your closing. Stop there. Make a copy of your database. Take that copy and upgrade that copy to Costpoint 7. Now you can go ahead and close in Costpoint 6 like you normally would, then turn around using that fully loaded database, close in Costpoint 7. At that point, I've got two closed systems. I've gone through my major processing. I can now make sure everything ties out, that everything processed the way I expected it to in Costpoint 7, so it ties back to Costpoint 6. It also gives you the ability from a processing perspective to look and see, okay, well, gee, it used to take me 35 minutes in Costpoint 6, now it only takes me 20 minutes in Costpoint 7, or whatever the case may be. That helps you set expectations as you work in your closing schedules for after you cut over to Costpoint 7. So then once you've gone through, you've done all your normal processing, you've closed your month, and you've proved everything out, now's the time to go back and look at your transactional testing. Again, unless you have oodles of money and you want to bring a consulting firm to do data entry for you, which I don't recommend, I'll talk about that in a minute, or you have just so much staff that you can do double data entry into two systems, you want to be smart about your testing. There are things you can do like your time and expense or any other batch cycles where you get a load from a third-party system. You'll go ahead and process that whole batch through and those transactions through. But things like journal entries or AP vouchers, things like that where there's a high volume, you don't necessarily want to try to duplicate all of that work. So what you want to do instead is pick a subset of that. Pick some sample transactions that are typical of the type of work that you do. Also pick out some unique transactions. There's always outliers. Yeah, I have this vendor and they give me this information, I've got to enter it a certain way. Capture those unique situations and use that as part of your testing. And what you want to do then is take it through the full business process. But again, it's just a subset. You start with your data entry, you'll post it, print your various reports. If necessary, do some processing on it, do the output at the end, receive some cash receipts, print some AP checks, print some payroll checks if you do payroll within Costpoint, create some invoices. Make sure you track that through the full business process. Likewise, if you use Cognos reports as part of your normal processing, you want to test those Cognos reports. Now, I'll touch on Cognos a little bit later, but in general, we have not come across situations where there were issues with Costpoint, with Cognos reports. However, things have changed. You want to test that. You don't want to go live and go, oh, I forgot to test this report, and it's a critical report, and you find out then that it doesn't work. And as I mentioned before, you want to test your interfaces. Things are different. The way they're processed is different in Costpoint 7 versus Costpoint 6. The interfaces should work, but you want to make sure that you know they work and you've gone through and tested that. Some of the specific areas that Deltek has run into, they shared with us, and as they look back at their statistics of where they run into issues, this kind of breaks it down for us in priority order or in volume order. The highest area they've run into is payroll. As I mentioned earlier, they moved all the code from Costpoint 6 over to Costpoint 7 and had to rewrite it. As Costpoint payroll has started back in the early 90s, payroll changes occur every year. There's new regulations, new requirements, new tax laws, and what had happened over time is as those changes were made, they kept adding new code here and there to the payroll module, and it met the functionality, but it was kind of disjointed and really hard to maintain. So then when an issue did come up, there were very few people that really understood the entire thing that could go in and fix it. So what they did is they set up and said, enough of this. We're going to do a quality initiative. We're going to make payroll better. So what they did is, unlike the other parts of Costpoint where they basically just kind of took the existing code, rewrote it in a new format, they totally rewrote the payroll module from the ground up. The great thing about that is it's faster, the code is a lot easier, process is faster, it's easier to maintain. The bad part about it is it's a new product. It's almost a 1.0 product because it's totally rewritten. So as a result, that tends to be an area where Costpoint or Deltek has seen their greatest number of issues as they move to Costpoint 7. I can tell you from my own personal experience in the companies I've upgraded, that's where we found our primary problems. The good thing about it is I've had a client live now over 6 months on Costpoint 7. They do payroll on Costpoint 7. When we ran into some problems early on, we worked with Deltek. They got those corrected, and it's been pretty much, everything's worked great since then. So again, as I mentioned earlier, stay on top of the hot fixes. That way, you're not finding other people's problems. As you go through there, you'll see this. There are other areas as the group works down. Projects and billings, obviously, that's some of the most complicated things that Deltek does or Costpoint does. So that's going to be another area we're going to find things and as you work through the system. So now that you've got your test plan in place and you figured out how you're going to approach your testing, the next thing you want to do is get your users trained and actually execute against the test plan itself. As I mentioned earlier, one of the biggest changes, or the biggest apparent change to Costpoint 7 is the user interface and how the users interact with the system. So with that in mind, you want to make sure they are trained up front. I showed you earlier in the statistics, 2/3 of the issues that Deltek has had on their support lines comes from just employees not knowing how to do things or where things are located. So a little bit of time invested up front doing good training will eliminate those problems for you. We offer, and I believe Deltek offers as well, some new user training in just the interaction itself. It's about a half-a-day class or less. It's inexpensive. It's well worth it. And actually, at the end of our session today, we'll offer you a coupon to give you a discount if you care to take that training from us. What the training does, though, is goes through and it teaches you the new paradigm, how the users interact with the system now. What's changed? How do I used to do lookups? How do I do lookups now? How do I used to do data entry? How do I do data entry now? How do I used to do reporting? How do I do reporting now? And it trains the employee and all those new paradigms so that as you start moving into Costpoint 7, it's like, oh, yeah, that makes sense. And it makes things move a lot faster. Beyond that training, once you get started going through the actual testing, you're going to want some coaching help there. And this is another good opportunity to use one of the consulting firms. Yes, people know how to do AP entry. They've been doing it for years, but it's a little bit different in Costpoint 7. Chances are if you can have somebody that can hold hands, reassure your users, it makes them, calms down their anxieties and will make your testing go a lot better as well. You might want to hold some training on individual modules, maybe some of the new things that came through, some of the new functionality, or perhaps you've got relatively new users in Costpoint, and this is a great opportunity to train them on the modules itself. As I mentioned earlier, when one person trains the next, trains the next, trains the next, they start losing some of that full understanding of the module. So this is an opportunity to go through and train on individual models. Working with one of the early adopters, they had a unique approach to testing, what they call testathons. Essentially what a testathon is they would block out a point of time, maybe 2 hours in an afternoon. They would bring everybody into a conference room with computers, and when they get everyone testing all at the same time. This actually accomplished two things. One, it made sure the testing got done, because you've got a captive audience and you're there making sure they're doing what you expect them to do. The other thing it does, though, is it helps them with their training and their learning. Since you've got everybody in the room, somebody's going to have a question, and chances are if one person has a question, somebody else is going to have that same question. So rather than answer that question multiple times, you can answer the question once and let everyone share in that knowledge experience. The other thing you want to do is plan for post-deployment support. Once you get through your testing, you've converted over, Again, going through testing is one thing. When I'm doing this in a live environment, there's another level of anxiety. So plan for some post-deployment support. Make sure you've still got some consultants there that can help you. They can do some hand-holding, reassure your users, answer questions. They may be silly questions, but it's real questions and real issues to the users. Costpoint 7 has been out, like I said, almost a year now. Prior to that, it's been roughly a year and a half, 2 years in beta with some pretty large clients beating on it. However, having run QC, I can tell you from experience, you can only test so many scenarios. With 1,000 Costpoint clients out there, chances are every one of them has some slightly different implementation, and you want to make sure that your implementation works. At Deltek and even within the beta testing group, there are only so many versions of implementations that you can test, so many different scenarios, so many different configurations. So you need to make sure that everything works for your scenarios, which is why it's so critical to go through and do thorough testing. So as you're going through this, as I mentioned earlier, make sure you're staying current on your hotfixes and they're all installed. So one of the things you want to consider is, as you're scheduling your testing out, as you work through your test plan, make sure you don't set your test plan up so that you wind up with bottlenecks. So that if I run into a problem in one area, I can't move forward in any other areas. Set your testing up so that things can be done in parallel. That way, if I run into one area, I can just jump over to another thread, keep moving that area until that first thread gets resolved, then I can pick back up. Seems obvious that people forget to do it. Maintain a log of your issues. What we recommend is you have one point of contact that works with Deltek. They can use that log and work back and forth with Deltek and make sure those issues are resolved, and you can stay on top of them, get them back to you as quickly as possible. Likewise, as part of that, plan on time for retesting. A lot of times, people put together a project plan assuming everything's going to work great the first time. They get through it, they run into an issue. They get to the end, it's like, we're supposed to go live this weekend, but I just got this hot fix back to fix the problem I had earlier, and I don't have time to test it. Plan that into your schedule. Put a little cushion in there. Again, it's been tested. Deltek has done a terrific job. I can tell you from experience, having run QC, as much as I want to say we put out top quality products then, I can honestly tell you this is the cleanest release I've seen out of Deltek in my 15 years experience with them. Actually, more than that. So finally, the big day comes. You reach the finish line, sort of. While you may have reached the finish line from a cutover perspective, there are things that still go on beyond that point. So you can't, it's like a horse race. You can't hit the finish line and just immediately put on the brakes. You've got to have time to let it run out and slow your speed down. Make sure you're doing a reconciliation of your Costpoint 6 before you do that final conversion to Costpoint 7. Once you've done that, everything should come over perfectly, but this is your accounting system. You want to make sure it reconciles. So once you've done your conversion, reconcile again to Costpoint 7, make sure everything came over, nothing's changed, and there's no surprises. As I mentioned, October, actually Brian mentioned earlier, October 1, 2013 is coming on us quickly, and that's when Deltek puts Costpoint 6 into sustaining support. You want to make sure that you're planning around that date and you're ready to cut over, or you have contingency plans beyond that date if you're not ready to cut over by that date. Lastly, make sure and keep Costpoint 6 around. Just because you finish your bath, don't dump the bathwater immediately. There's still a chance in a full environment that you may run into something in a live environment that you didn't encounter, or maybe you forgot to test as part of your testing. If you've got 6 there available and online, it's really easy to go back and from your point of cutover, re-enter that data and be able to keep Costpoint 6 moving forward so your business doesn't stop. If you take it offline, then you're kind of stuck until Costpoint 7's up and going again. As I mentioned, the clock is ticking. There's about 31 weekends left between now and October 1, which means if you haven't started yet, your number's far less than 31 of the time, so you can actually cut over and be live by October 1. Keep that in mind as you're working your plan. Just a couple other considerations. Many of you are in cost time and expense 8.3 right now. 9.0 came out earlier, and actually They just released the first service pack to T&E 901. From a time and expense, from a time perspective, time and expense 901 is great. From an expense perspective, you may want to take your time moving to T&E 901. They're still working through some issues on that, and let's just say take the opportunity to learn from other people's mistakes. To let you know some of the changes that do take place in T&E 901 is, like Costpoint 701, it replaces the Actuate server with the BERT reporting services. One of the nice things that it provides you is a new touch functionality or technology available for mobile platforms. That means you'll be able to enter your time on iPads, iPhones, or Androids. BlackBerries aren't available yet. But the nice thing is it doesn't require any new licensing. It comes as part of that functionality. The other thing to consider is the move to Cognos 10. Cognos 10 is the next release of Cognos. And as I mentioned earlier, we haven't encountered any issues and we don't expect any issues. But as you're moving your reports from Costpoint, your Cognos reports from Costpoint 6 to 7, you do want to test it, make sure everything's there. As part of that, you want to look at upgrading to Costpoint 10. In a couple weeks from now in March, we're going to be holding a new webinar. We'll go more in depth into Costpoint 10. We'll talk about the migration path and really some of the features that you should be aware of and concerned about. And with that, I'll turn it back over to Brian. Thank you.
Thank you, Randy. That was very informative, and hopefully it was useful to a lot of people out there. What I want to do now is, based upon everything Randy shared with you and the timeline that we reviewed, let's take another poll question and ask ourselves the question, now that you've looked at that timeline and the steps you need to take, what concerns do you have about your Costpoint 7 upgrade? Are you concerned about upgrading prior to the October 1st deadline? What about the new infrastructure requirements? Developing and executing that test plan, training users on the new interface? Or is there some other issue you might have? If you've got others, please write them in the question box. We'll see maybe if we can get to look at that during that time. And please be aware you can check off as many as you want. So if you've got lots of issues and concerns, you can check them all. So I think we're a couple more coming in, and I think I'll give you 5 seconds. 4, 3, 2, 1. Close the poll. Let's see the results. Okay. The number one answer, developing and executing that test plan. So Randy, I'm glad you got a chance to go through that in such detail for everyone. I hope that helped. And yeah, upgrading by that October 1st deadline. Ooh, training users also. Training users was actually number one. Sorry about that. It's in a pale color on here. So if you, those are big issues, and I'm glad, Randy, you were able to go into such detail with them. I hope that helped some with all of you. What I'd like to bring you to is some other resources that can help you with some of these issues. We do have the blog. And in the blog, we get into a lot of these issues. We talk about business level issues such as the Costpoint 6 extended support. We talk about how to use the project templates. We talk about the how to make the screens your way. So we get into a lot of these different areas that can help you. This is a free resource available to you. I do encourage you to use it. Also, we do have the training course coming up on March 19th that Randy alluded to. And this is a class that goes into the real end-user experience. It goes into not only the changes, but then lets you do some hands-on exercise. You get into Costpoint 7. You get a demo account that lets you go in and practice the exercises that you're given. That class costs $245. We get a 20% discount. So with the discount, that's under $200 a user, a really good investment for your end users who are going to be doing the testing. And as Randy also mentioned, we got another webinar coming up on upgrading to Cognos 10. That'll be on March 21st. You can check out a follow-up email or check out our website for that. Okay, so please, now what we're going to do is open it up to questions. So I want to thank you, though, for participating in the webinar today. But let's see what questions. And we always get this question about, will the recording be available? Will the slides be available? We will make the recording available on our website. So please look for the blog, a blog post about it, and there should be a link in a follow-up email to you.
Another question we have is, what is the budgetary cost for upgrade consulting? That's really, it's going to vary by client, and it's also going to vary by what services you're looking for us to provide. We can help you from as little as just providing you a test environment, so we can host your test system so you can go play with it yourself or do a little bit of training, up to the point where we can actually come on site with you. We can help do your coaching. We can convert your stored stored parameters. We can do the security review for you and we set up your new security model. So it kind of varies. The best thing to do is to give our salespeople a call, and we'll be glad to sit down with you, kind of talk to you about in detail what services we offer and figure out what works best for you in your environment and what your needs are, and come up with a price that way.
Great, thank you. A good question here. Is it required to upgrade to Cognos 10 along with Costpoint 7?
It's not a requirement. Costpoint 8 will still work with Costpoint 7. However, as Costpoint moves forward, there are enhancements in Cognos 10. It's really pretty much a painless upgrade from the 8 to 10. It's obviously the install of the new software for Cognos 8. It gives you a more powerful engine and things along those lines. Again, the webinar in a few weeks will give it into more detail, but you can delay it. I'm not sure when, off the top of my head, the support for Cognos 8 ends, but it will work to answer your question.
Yeah, well, and one of the things about upgrading to Cognos 10 that we're finding for a lot of our users, and maybe Randy, you can elaborate on this, is the idea that if you can get that upgrade done now, it's a quicker upgrade, so you can do it before you do the upgrade to Costpoint 7, and that will allow your users to get comfortable with Cognos 10 and be one less thing you need to do after upgrading to Cognos, after upgrading to Costpoint 7.
Correct. Another question is on moving to T&E. We said we recommend upgrading, but we also said please wait. We do recommend you upgrade to T&E 9. It's a better architecture for the product itself. It shares the same type of architecture as Costpoint 7. What we're saying is you want to, from a time side, if you're only using time and not expense, I'll go ahead and do it as soon as you possibly can. The learning curve is very small from an end user perspective. However, when you move to the expense side, they totally redone the workflow of how expense is entered in T&E 9 as opposed to T&E 8 series. So there's going to be some learning curve there, as well as from my own experience, we're still running into some issues there that, as I mentioned, I'd rather somebody else learn the issue and get it corrected versus me having to deal with that.
Yeah, if I could add an exception to that, if you're using travel in Costpoint 6, then you would want to upgrade to T&E 9 because travel is not in Costpoint 7.
That's correct. Travel is not in Costpoint 7. I will share with you that in my experience, I've never ran across a client using it, but we did recently come across one client using travel. So I know it was actually used.
And the reason why I know it is because of a client that I'm familiar with who was one of the early adopters to Costpoint 7.
The next question, is it required to upgrade to T&E 901 with Costpoint 7 since they're currently on version 8.3? No, it's not required. The concern is, much like Costpoint 6 support moves to Costpoint 6 moves to sustained support October 1, Costpoint 8.3 is also moving to sustained support on October 1. So while it will work with it, again, you don't want to have a business critical software on an unsupported version. Question, Cognos 8 reports compatible with Cognos 10. Yes, they are compatible. You'll need to run them. Again, anytime you make a change, you want to test it, but they are compatible, and we really haven't come across any circumstances where things need to be rewritten. Next question. We're just using time. Should we upgrade to Costpoint 7 upgrade before or after? Again, if you have time, it doesn't hurt to go ahead and do it before. Just because you don't want to do two things at the same time, make two changes at the same time. I wouldn't try to do them in one fell swoop. Either go ahead and upgrade to TNA 9 if you're just using time before you go to 7 or after.
Okay. A lot of questions about this time and expense issue, so hopefully we've answered it, but we'd be happy to follow up with people one-on-one if you have specific questions. Getting a lot of thank yous out there. We appreciate that. Okay. You want to take the rest of these questions offline? We got a couple more there, but they seem rather specific.
There's one question here on the please provide some insight with the SQL Server collation issue. To be honest with you, that's a technical question, and I know enough technical things to get myself and you in trouble. So that's better off if you want to call in and talk to someone from our technical staff. They'll be able to go to that more in detail with you.
Okay, great. Well, we want to thank everybody for participating in our webinar today. And as I said, as a special thank you, we have that 20% discount on the Costpoint 7 class, which includes hands-on training getting into Costpoint 7. And if you have any specific questions that we did not answer, please feel free to email us. We're always happy to try to answer your questions and help you out. Thank you.
Have a good day.